talked about a number of things. Now we're going to move on to the 4 steps to the actual transition. So different people have done this in a number of different ways, but basically I've boiled it down here to 4 basic steps. And those are facilitate awareness, you're going to conduct a preliminary impact assessment, you're going to develop and execute your COSO transition plan, and then you're going to drive continuous improvement. Now for those of you who have already implemented SOX, this last piece, drive continuous improvement, if this was part of your plan in the initial SOX process, then this will make this whole transition much easier because you've been updating the grids, you've been updating your test matrices and making sure that things are current. It will help this new transition. If you haven't been doing that on a regular basis, then this will all take a little bit longer. So first of all, we're going to facilitate awareness. And in doing that, you can do this in a number of ways. So, there was a big panic when the first SOX implementation came on. We had large groups of SOX teams and that kind of thing. We may not need to do quite that level of intense groups, but we may want to reinstate our SOX teams that we had at that point or a subset of those teams. We certainly want to have discussions with management and certainly with the board of directors and audit committee. What you want is the audit committee and the board are aware of the new COSO model, that it has to be implemented by the end of this year, and make sure that they're not caught short if anybody asks them about what your company is doing to make this transition. You want them to have at least enough information that they can have a reasonable conversation about that. And finally here, you're going to want to have a discussion with your external auditors at the very beginning about what their expectations are so that they're involved at the very beginning of the process. So, you're going to conduct a preliminary impact assessment. This is going to involve a number of things. It can be done in a number of different ways. You can start with the tone at the top, as I mentioned previously. The tone at the top or the control environment used to be at the bottom of the pyramid, but now it's at the top of the pyramid where everything kind of flows down from that. So you could use some questionnaires to discuss parts of this, look at policies and procedures, whistleblower security, things like that. So all of that can be used to conduct this preliminary assessment. We discussed the new fraud emphasis. I know in our grids originally, fraud was somewhat of an afterthought. So like the fraud, whether a control was to help prevent or detect fraud, kind of went into the test matrice rather than in the full-blown control matrice. And so this is, now that we have this new emphasis on fraud detection and prevention, we want to make sure that that's integrated from the very beginning in all of the controls and that we think about that up front. And so this is where also we need to look at our control grids and test matrices. Where are they? What has been done? What needs to be updated? And that kind of thing. Certainly the key controls need to be revisited. Even if we've been keeping this information current, this is kind of that time to go back and look at key controls. We talked a little bit about, when the initial SOX implementation came into play, that, we kind of threw everything in the kitchen sink at it. Now, we can kind of come back to this age of reason of making sure that the controls are appropriate for our environment and that the key controls, that we really capture those controls that are the key ones. Updating of the test matrices, once we've determined those key controls, then certainly the test matrices will have to be updated as well. So where are the gaps in the test matrices? It's very important, and many people have already done this, but if you haven't designated ownership of those control matrices, this is the time, because if you don't designate an owner of the test matrices and the control grids, well, specifically the control grids, then suddenly everybody looks to internal audit to be the owner. We really shouldn't be the owners of the grids because we're not in those departments on a day-to-day basis to be able to say what the changes are and what's happening. So we definitely want to designate ownership, even if it's a couple of people, so that when it comes time to updating those grids on a regular basis, we know who that is. And certainly this last piece, some kind of sign-off by those owners so that we know that those are getting updated.